Okay. So I've double-checked. We have our panelists online. So without further ado, I'm going to introduce our moderator for our next panel. We have with us Tom Bicknell, partner at the law firm Pinson Masons. Welcome on stage, Tom. A round of applause, please.
Good afternoon, everybody. We've got a really good panel today. I'll ask my fellow panel members to come up. We've got 3 here and 2 who are going to be on the screen behind us. So as they come over, I'll introduce each of them. So Mr. Ahmed Al-Hajari, Senior Board Advisor, Bahrain Technologies Company Society, Founder and Secretary General of the Arab ICT Union. Mr. Christian Kuntz, Head of Group Strategy and Innovation, DIFC. So Christian leads the team that are developing the DIFC's approach to financial services and technology and driving the future of finance agenda. Mr. Vivek Sakadi, Head of Business Intelligence and Data Warehouse at Reliance General Insurance India. And Vivek, I saw the comment is you were the first person in India to implement an AI-enabled data estimator for claims settlement and auto insurance. And then the last 2 panelists, certainly last but not least, we have Mr. Hisham Al-Fali, CEO of LeanTech. LeanTech are developers of AI, APIs in a complex financial world that provides access to financial data and payment initiation. And Mr. Michele Giordani, Managing Partner and Founder of GELLIFY. Michele is a data scientist specializing in B2B software with a particular focus on big data analytics and machine learning. So we're taking a different tack. We've obviously had a lot of conversation really delving into AI specifically as a topic. We're actually looking at this from AI's application in the financial services sector and specifically open banking. And I think most of our panelists will have a good idea what that means, but for those of you who are more purely orientated towards AI, I thought one of our panelists might want to give their views. So I might pick on Hisham. I don't know if you mind to give us a bit of a layman's explanation as to what we're talking about when we get into open banking.
Hisham, we can't hear you.
Hisham, I don't know if you can hear us. We can't hear you, unfortunately. I think that's going to change, so just stand by a minute. Okay. All right. Sorry, Hisham. I don't know if you can hear us. We're going to have to substitute you for Christian. Do you mind helping us out there, Christian?
Yeah. Hi, everybody. Very excited to be on this panel. I think there are 2 big topics by itself, open banking, artificial intelligence. I think we could spend days talking about this, but maybe just give you a bit of what we mean by open banking. And there's actually a trend now moving towards the word open finance. But open banking originated in Europe, at least the term. It means that banks, financial services companies are opening up their data to other licensed Fintech companies, other banks, to access customer data in a secure way in order to put, at the end of the day, data back into the hands of the customer's control to offer new types of services, insights, make it easier to access your different financial accounts. There are 2 main, from a regulatory point of view, 2 main licenses which are quite important in that context, and I think we'll hear more about it later. One is called the account initiation or account information services, and the second is payment initiation services. So these are 2 of the use cases that are most commonly mentioned. One is actually customers getting access to all of their account information in one place from different banks, and in the other case, actually initiating payments from different accounts in order from, for example, an app directly. And I think Hisham, Lean Technology is one of the examples in the region working on open banking from a fintech point of view.
Thanks, Christian. Maybe we'll just try again then with our panelists online to take the step from that. So I think that's a really good explanation of open banking, and it leads us into when we talk about the application of AI to open banking. I mean, I'm a lawyer, so arguably a layman in this sector. What strikes me as the primary application is that you are, with open banking, you're creating a whole huge seam of data, particularly sensitive data, and so the application of AI to that and the ability to analyze is obviously a potentially hugely advantageous tool. Michele or Hisham, if we can hear you, do you want us to give a view as to where you think the AI application is at in terms of the open banking space?
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, good. So thank you very much for having me here, and thanks for the question, Tom. I think it is a very interesting push that open banking brings to the market, and in terms of application of AI, I would say that we need to first say that open banking is doing more than just giving availability of the data. It's actually giving availability of the systems, no? Because when you have account aggregation and payment initiation, you're basically saying that you are opening up, interacting with the accounts rather than just looking into them. So there is a huge opportunity there for banks, for sure, to be more intimate with the customers, but also to collaborate and do more in terms of what the other industries are doing. Leveraging the financial institutions. So there is obviously a matter of how am I paying my electricity bills rather than my credit for anything, but also services that we use every day might be a target for banks and financial institutions to be more effectively served by finance. So that is, I think, one of the key things that we need to keep in mind. Then AI comes in as a powerful way to make sense of all this data, characterize all the customers, their behaviors, and we talk a lot also about the customers, but there are also companies into this, because open banking obviously serves also small, medium, and large enterprises. But that is, I think, the biggest way that artificial intelligence can help with this, and this might be in bringing, for example, credit products to underserved segments, and there will be a tremendous thing to add in order to foster also engagement in society, but also to bring different products and different offers to your banking customers, but also to telco consumer base or utilities customer base. That is what is happening right now, for example, in Europe. So that is the direction what this leads to. The last thing, then I will speak for a bit, is about the speed of this. So what we are seeing is that obviously financial institutions are used to a speed of creating new offerings and products that is lower than the previous year. Startups are there waiting for the moment where open banking arrives in order to jump into the arena. So that is very important for all financial institutions to understand that and embrace this in an open innovation kind of way in order to be the quickest as possible in arriving to market with this innovation in offer and intimacy that they can build with customers.
Thanks, Michele. That was a really good overview, I think, of all the potential applications. Hisham, I'll try again with you. Without wishing to ask you to give away any proprietary secrets, is AI something you're using with Lean with you guys at the moment? Is it on the cards?
Yeah.
Is it far away?
Yeah, absolutely. Tom, can you hear me now? Just checking.
Yeah. We can, perfectly.
Excellent. It's a pleasure to be here with you all virtually, and apologies for the technical difficulties. To answer your question immediately, Tom, absolutely it is. We believe the future of financial technology in the region is actually going to be very data heavy. And the reason for that is the problem for payments has actually been solved for many years now. Debit cards, credit cards, and other payment processes have been available for financial technology companies for a while. And so when we're talking about open banking and payment initiation, that's only providing a more seamless and probably a more cost-effective approach to payments. However, when we think about data has been blocked. So there's been no way for financial technology companies up to probably 2019 and 2020 in the region to access consumer data. So that's going to unlock everything from, Michele mentioned, smoother onboarding, KYC, and fraud detection, to very complex financial products like lending at the point of sale, very complex accounting processes for SMEs, robo-advisory and AI implemented with providing customers with customized solutions and product offerings. And so I actually believe over the next 5 or 10 years, especially in our region, we're going to see artificial intelligence being applied to the data that is being mined by open banking in a really fascinating way that is going to be very difficult to predict. And to take it back to your question, we at MENA are investing very heavily in data science, artificial intelligence, and machine learning to ensure that the clients of Lean can leverage the best-in-class solutions to serve their end clients.
Thanks, Hisham. Ahmed, I've done a bit of work with the open banking regime in Bahrain, and I think it's probably the first in the GCC to move forward with this. But your role, I presume, is wider than that. Do you want to give us a bit of a view in terms of how you're seeing AI being applied with some of the stakeholders you work with?
Well, hi everybody. It's good to be here. Thank you, Tom. You see, when you look at the element of open banking, AI, and banking in general, and again now the topic and this session says marriage. So yes, there is seems to be some kind of a marriage happening between the two to create Fintech. There are three major partners in this: the customer, the banks, the regulator. And what we've seen previously, the regulator was always the showstopper. I know you are a lawyer, so legally, is everybody protected? And things were always going slow. And what we've seen in Bahrain, once the regulator, the Central Bank of Bahrain, opened up Fintech sandbox, allowing everybody to come in and start their own Fintechs, and AIs was also mentioned with His Majesty the King of Bahrain that all the government is going AI. We see the same thing in UAE. Things have moved much faster. So there is leadership, there is direction, there is regulation that enabled it. And today's customer is really eager for it. I don't think majority of the customers are worried about their security, but it's always there because you always worry about your security. But they want things faster, they want things to happen, and they want to access their information, and that's what has been driving it so fast. Again, as we heard it from the previous session, COVID-19 has its own push. So I'm not the oldest guy in this room, but long time back I worked in a bank, Riyadh Bank, and I've seen it from the day we opened ledgers and people write by hand, to ATMs, to credit cards, to online banking, and how things have re-evolved. And today things are evolving so fast that we have no choice but just coping up. It's competition, it's customer comfort security. So I see a very good convergence between open banking, where we've seen several banks today, especially in Bahrain. You can open a bank in less than 10 minutes, a bank account. It's just amazing. You can decide, you can have 10 credit cards, one in euro, one in pound. Last year, this was not even discussable. The regulator even will not let you do that. But today, we've seen it. Young banks, small banks, lean banks are going. So I think we've seen history in the last 2-3 years when it comes to open banking. I'm not sure if it's very visible, AI and open banking as happening in real life as a spread in the experience, at least within the region. But I think today it's the way forward, and it's going to happen much faster than we expected.
I mean, I would second the comment that I think the regulators have a very important role in this. And I think what's great I see in the Middle East all the time is that the regulators and the government authorities consider it incumbent upon themselves to help drive an agenda rather than wait for it to happen and then react in terms of regulation. I think it does give the market confidence, and it gives a clear path for new entrants. Vivek, I might throw over to you. So Reliance has obviously led the way a bit in terms of applying AI in the insurance sector. How's it been for you then, working with that in a more of, I suppose, a financial institution as opposed to a startup which is, can be very quick and nimble. An institution has bureaucracy, it has a lot of compliance that it has to deal with. How did you go about, pushing that agenda forward and working with that within Reliance?
Hi everybody. So we all know that the AI is a perfect marriage between the technology and the human. In fact, if you can see in the Indian insurance market, we don't have a KYC. So understanding that these 5 or 6 policies belongs to a same customer is the biggest challenge for us. Initially, we do this by using a tool like a SaaS, where we have some rule-based engine and then apply some rule and then identify that, okay, this 5 policy belongs to X or Y or Z person. But that is also not accurate up to the mark. If you don't have a unique ID or a cluster ID for customer, you cannot run your upsell or cross-sell models. You cannot identify the churns, you cannot do the campaigns on that. When AI comes into the picture in the insurance market, it helps us to select 100 of variables in a milliseconds, and it gives us a 99% accurate results to identify the customer, or these 5, 6 policies belong to the same customer. Now, because of that, we are now doing all the analytics based on these customer IDs. We are generating our customers, we are saying our campaigns, we are just minimize the churn in the process. And now this data, and these data generated from the AI is helping us on a claim settlement as well as. So normally, claim settlement takes 25 to 30 days to settle down in a motor insurance field. And in India, you got the 90% of general insurance business from the motor. Now, initially people have to submit a photograph, surveyor goes to the field, he takes the picture of accidental car, and then it goes to the underwriters. He analyzes the cost, it's sent to the customer or a garage, and then the whole process is a little bit long and a lot of manual efforts are there. Now we just implemented it on a mobile app. Customer, whenever the accident happens, he just need to click the pic of accidental part or a car and upload it into the mobile app. Using a mobile app, it can identify how much damage is there. Is this part is replaceable or repairable? Suppose X car has got accident on a bumper side. The algorithms can identify it is a replaceable or repairable. At the same time, they can identify that how much depth of a damage is there. Suppose the depth of a damage is a 10 centimeters, so which part, which side, and which part behind that might got damaged, and the probability of that. And on the basis of that, it can give you the estimated cost of a damage. If customer wants to settle it down, immediately, that it's a hardly 2 minutes, he can settle down the claim. And if he wants to go not satisfied with the cost which is thrown by the AI-based algorithm, they can go with a process that is also available for that. So you can see that how much customer, because we all know that nowadays the approach is changing. Companies are not a product-based approach. Now everybody has a customer-centric approach. You have to build your product as per the customer need, as well as the same time you have to customize it. So these things are helping us on AI.
One thing I want to pick up on there, and I might throw this to Christian first, is because we mentioned this before, is one of the last 2 or 3 presentations we've seen have been around the inherent potential bias, and one of the presenters made a very good point of saying, it's not necessarily the people who are programming the AIs as much as it's the underlying data we're talking about. The thing with financial data is it's very sensitive information. Insurance is particularly when we can be talking about health information, but likewise any form of financial information. And Christian, your role is obviously to develop this sector, of the economy, but you need to do that in a sustainable way. And when you're facilitating that transfer and sharing of data, what are the sort of concerns or things you deal with in terms of the security of it?
Yeah, no, very good question, Tom. And let me answer it actually in 2 parts. I think the question was part of the questions of the panel is like, there's so many opportunities in open banking and AI. Why is it not picking up like crazy and everybody's just capturing the value? And the simple answer is that with these new technologies, there's a lot of risks coming with them, and there's a lot of areas that people don't understand, that we don't yet fully understand, and then there's areas where there's barriers where as Hisham mentioned, there's no access to certain data to date. I think the parallel between both open banking and AI is how do we build trust and how do we build understanding of unlocking these opportunities. And I can talk a little bit about what DFC is doing in that context and what I'm doing in that context. And a few areas is, first of all, is data protection. Data protection laws in this region don't exist. The DFC put in place earlier this year the first GDPR compliant data protection laws. We're in process of getting adequacy with the UK, with Europe, to actually be able to exchange data in a secure way with the same standards that you would find in other global countries. So I think that's one thing. The second thing is obviously working with the different stakeholders, as mentioned, financial institutions, non-financial institutions, fintechs, government, regulators, the customers itself, and DFC as a financial center, as the largest financial center in the region, with over 2,700 entities, over 25,000 people working in it, having over 500 regulated firms. That's just compared to the UAE Central Bank having 300 or 278. SAMA has around 300, so 500 regulated firms. So we have a lot of exposure to financial regulated companies. We have our own regulator, the DFSA. We have over 200 fintech companies. And actually working together within the DFC as well as with the regulators in the market, the UAE Central Bank, regional with Bahrain, with Saudi and others, to actually figure out how can we make that happen. One big milestone that we're working against, and we were part of the MENA Fintech Association that just published the vision for open banking in the Arab world, is actually standards. So how do we get, first of all, standards on APIs, standards on cybersecurity, standards on cloud, that make it easier to work together. The second thing is then to figure out how do we make all these parties work together and everybody trusts each other and has also value to generate. Because it's not obvious for every stakeholder where is the value you will generate in that aspect. And then obviously you talked about bias. And I think bias is linked to data sets. So as many people might not want to hear it, but without regulation and without government potentially looking into how can we identify, how can we regulate, how can we avoid bias, I don't think it will be possible without having some independent bodies that will monitor those common rules that are accepted to be considered biased or unbiased, and be able to flag them, and then to help companies and the ecosystem to take better decisions in that context. So very complex, if we want to summarize, a lot of unanswered topics, especially that we need to tackle going forward, and in many cases not tackled globally yet. But I think, as mentioned, there's a lot of appetite from all the stakeholders. There's a lot of collaboration accelerated with COVID to move towards that vision, and I see in the next year to be happening a lot in this region on open banking, on AI, and on enabling these new technologies.
Thanks, Christian. Michele, could I just throw that question to you as a data scientist? Do you think this is a conversation that should be driven by the technology providers, or more of the public sector, say, so more from the regulator and authorities?
I think it's both. But let me say first, there is a point that we need to be aware of. That is, when we bring biases into the conversation, we are basically touching on a topic that might be actionable or not within the company. Okay? So, in the previous speech from IBM, we discussed how they are avoiding to do facial recognition, so application of AI, in order not to infringe some of their core ethical beliefs. Okay, that's perfect. There are some cases in which this is the case, so bias can be addressed within the corporate, within the company, and an action can be taken. But there are other cases in which biases just emerge from the process, so you are able at a certain point, through data science and through the availability of big data, to spot some biases. And this might be relevant for society, for example. So the causes of that might be something that is rooted into education or a certain group of certain communities or ethnicities to have some issues that are then coming to the process, and then, for example, for access to credit that is really easy to say, no? If you have a group or a community that has a low income, then this is harder to get into the credit world, and this is continuing to fuel itself. So this is important for everybody to understand, in order to understand why do we need all people to be involved into this. So there are regulators, there are the business guys into the company, there is the technical guys and the data scientists. Let's merge these two together so that they are all aware that they need to work on both. So the things that we expect to come out of the process, we expect to come out from data, and the things that might be something that then the companies gives back to society in terms of, okay, we have seen this happening, how do we tackle this? Because we don't know if it is a bias that the company should be addressing. So during my career, I have pushed a lot for data science to be, let's say, driven from action. So which kind of action I would like to implement, and then going backward to data science. And this is what I think on bias is one of the key points. So you don't know what's written into the data. So some of these things might be actions that you can take, and some are actions that you need to discuss with the other bodies. So this, I think, is a very important point to be aware of.
Thanks, Michele. I'm conscious we want to leave some time for the audience, so I'll perhaps ask one more question and put that out to the whole panel. I'll start with you then, Hisham. So in terms of how we see this marriage that we talked about at the beginning, the title of this panel, what do you, I suppose, what's your wish list? What do you want to see, maybe in terms of other stakeholders that you think can help, make that marriage come quicker and help you guys employ AI in your business?
That's a great question, Tom. Look, I think in order for us to arrive at a society where artificial intelligence is fully deployed and utilized, we need to first come to terms with the fact that we need access to data. I think we're kind of referring to it very broadly, but the reality is, at the most fundamental level, customers do own their data, and customers should be empowered to opt in or opt out and share their data with third parties as and when they choose to. And so one of the governing principles of open banking is customer consent. And not only that, but how do you manage that consent, allow the customer to continuously change and revoke consent with the third parties with which they share data, monitor the data consumption trends that are happening, and be in the driver's seat for how their data is being consumed. Because ultimately, they will be benefiting or not benefiting from sharing that data. Right now, the topic is obviously about open banking, but tomorrow we're going to be looking at open finance, and even more broadly, how is a customer going to be able to share their telco data or their healthcare data or their utilities data or any other type of data with third parties. And I think, and Michele may agree with me, the real value of AI is when those data sets are merged. So the superset of data, let's say, between healthcare and finance is where you're going to see some really interesting applications in healthcare insurance, to your point earlier. So I think, just to touch on the point that was brought up previously about privacy, the point that you just mentioned, Tom, about the merger of open banking and artificial intelligence, I think we need to empower the customer, educate the customer, and enable the fruits of AI and open banking to be felt before we expect this to be so mainstream. But it's obviously a factor of time, and I'm confident that we're moving in the right direction nevertheless.
Thanks, Hisham. Ahmed, would you agree empowering the customer is a key thing that needs to happen more?
Yes, I agree. I think customers should see first also the benefit. If customers see a benefit from any service, the consumption will be higher and the reluctances will be lower. And we've seen it. Again, I always go back to history. When ATM cards were first, do you go to an ATM or do you stand in a queue in a bank? So eventually customers chose the ATM because the benefit was there. So customers, when they see that they can process their transactions faster, if they can do it from the convenience of their mobile home or wherever they're traveling, they will be the decision makers, and they will avoid banks or financial institutions that makes it troublesome for them to benefit from the service. And the banks will have to follow the customer, because the customer is going to decide, this is the best customer service or customer experience I want to like, and I'm going to go for it.
Christian, any views?
Yeah, I agree with all that has been said. I would say what's really important is to how do we make this work and how do we drive adoption, and therefore the customer is at the core, but we need to find ways to create value for all the stakeholders, including the financial institutions, the customers, the regulators, and others, and the value might be different, and then help drive adoptions in that context. And I'll give you one example of where data and AI is working very, very well, but the value is not being captured, and that is one of the big schemes. I recently talked to them. There's billions of transactions that go through their payment networks, and they're using AI to identify fraud. And AI is very, very good, and they identify a lot of fraud that will go to the banks, but the banks are not at the moment set up in the way to actually react to that prediction, to that recommendation, to actually act on it at the time, at the milliseconds or the minutes that this information is passed on to the bank. So how do we take those stakeholders and bring them together and create actually use cases and value for each stakeholder that can enable adoption of those open banking and AI use cases in a pragmatic way. That's sort of where I'm hoping to then continue working with all of those different stakeholders together and get that moving in this region, hopefully very, very soon.
Okay. Vivek, anything to add?
Of course, customer is the key, and from where actually we are getting the business. So all the businesses goes around the business and about the sales. But we need to, as an organization, we need to find out which is the best use case for the AI and what would be the ROI for that. Of course, nowadays everything people wants or the customer wants everything very quickly. So you need to see that how basically most of the time your data behind the AI is not structured on a well format, and the results are that goes anywhere. So first everybody need to understand that how the data structure is there, how you have a data management, and then go for the AI and select a good use case which will provide you the ROI as well as the good experience to the customer at the same time. If customer is happy with your services, definitely some mouth publicity should go there, some business enhancement comes into your pocket. That will drive you to take some other use cases, and you can connect it with some other technologies like IoT or blockchain. We all know that these are the technologies for the next 5 years, disrupting technology for the next 5 years. So yeah.
Thanks, Vivek. Do we have any questions from the audience?
Good evening. If I want to classify this session, I'll say it's very naive sessions. Reason is you are talking about banking and transaction in a very scalar rather than vector. Can you imagine the data collected through every single transaction done by any customers? And this data is used again to plunder the wealth of the non-developed people. People in Africa, forget about the people in this part of the world where cash is available. But think of the rural states where India, Africa, and Latin America. All these banks are really thirsty to collect this data and use it against the customers when it comes to wealth plundering. All the cash is transferred to the superpower banks, to the sharks, and then again used in order to plunder the underdeveloped countries. So will you justify this? We are happy with this transaction. This small machines is very colonial machine, because that is where the sharks are controlling the third world.
I mean, there's other panelists to respond to that, but what I would say is the very basis of open banking is to move that data out of the hands of just the banks and democratize it and actually give ownership back to customers more. I'm sure some of the other panelists will have an opinion on that, but I wouldn't say it's quite the case.
If we could just take maybe literally like 30 seconds because we're out of time.
Yeah, I would just echo what Tom said. I think it's a fair point. I think that's where I said, I think government regulators, all stakeholders need to play a role. I would say if you look at Europe and how open banking, how PSD2 has enabled actually customers to move away from big banks and have more control, I would say open banking is probably one example of trying to go the right direction. But I fully agree. I mean, it's way too complex. There's way too many topics to just leave it up to the industry alone. It has to be a joint effort.
Thank you, gentlemen, and thank you for your question. A round of applause, please, for our panel today.
Thank you, Tom.
No, thank you very much.
Thank you, all of you. And if you could
Thank you for having us.
from the stage, this way. Thank you. Thanks, Tom. Moving right along, I'd like to welcome to the stage Dr. Aviv Zivi, the VP for Technological Transfer at Israel's Innovation Authority. He will be taking us through the social and economic cost of the trend towards AI. Welcome on stage, Dr. Aviv. Round of applause, please.
Thank you. I'm really excited to be here. If someone would ask me 2 months ago if an Israeli would come here to Dubai,